Hi, I'm Hannah, and if you're watching this, you're probably a sourdough beginner and just getting started and so confused on how to actually bake a loaf of sourdough bread in your home oven. Many people use what we call a Dutch oven, which is a cast iron pot with a lid. That is going to allow your loaf to rise before it seals from the hot oven externally. It's going to trap enough steam in order to allow those gases to expand that have built up in the loaf during bulk fermentation. There's many things that you can use to bake a loaf of sourdough bread in your oven. You can also use the double loaf pan method, which is where you take one loaf pan, put your loaf inside, score your loaf, and put the second one on top. This creates a mini Dutch oven. This will trap steam and allow your loaf to rise in your hot oven before it seals prematurely. And then finally, a roasting pan is also something I like to use. There's different sizes, but this also traps enough steam to allow your loaf to rise. The bottoms get a little bit crispy because it is a very thin material. Some people will use a baking sheet underneath it on the bottom rack of the oven to prevent unnecessary heat hitting the bottom and burning your loaf. Today we're going to be baking in a Dutch oven, which is the most common way. I have a 7-quart oval Dutch oven, but many just use a 5.5-quart Dutch oven or greater in order to bake a 900 to 1,000 gram loaf. For the purpose of this video, we're just going to talk about the double loaf pan method or using a Dutch oven and show you how to do that in your home oven. My 7-quart Dutch oven has been preheating in my home electric oven at 500 degrees Fahrenheit for the last hour. It is becoming nice and hot, which is prime conditions for baking sourdough. The reason being is we want it nice and hot so that when the cold sourdough loaf hits the hot pan, moisture is going to release and create a lot of steam. Since there's a lid on the top of the Dutch oven, that is going to trap steam and allow our bread to fully rise and expand to its full potential. Having the lid on halfway through the bake is going to prevent it from browning prematurely and allow it to open up beautifully. The crust is going to stay soft enough for it to fully expand before the crust gets too hard and seals. However, I do not bake at 500 degrees Fahrenheit because that's actually too hot. I'm only preheating to 500 and I'm going to turn down the temperature to 450 degrees Fahrenheit for about 20 to 25 minutes, and then I will take off the top. You can choose if you want to leave the lid on for 20 to 30 minutes. It just depends on how dark you like your crust. If you like your crust a lot lighter, I would leave the lid on for 30 minutes and take it off for the last 10 to 15 minutes of the bake. If you like your crust really dark and crispy, I would say to leave it on for about 20-25 minutes and leave it off for the remainder of the bake. Everybody's oven runs at a different temperature. So even if it says it's at 450, your oven could run hotter or colder, and you may have to adjust by 10 or so degrees to accommodate for your particular oven. Our loaves have been cold proofing for 10 plus hours, and now they're ready to get out of the fridge, score, and bake. So I take my loaves directly out of the fridge, score them right away, and bake them right away. I don't ever let them come back to room temperature. When you score them directly out of the fridge, they are easier to score because the crust is firm. But if you were to let them come to room temperature, the crust would be a lot harder to score with a bread lawn and blade, and you would just see it lose its shape more, and it would likely over ferment. The purpose of scoring is to allow your loaf to expand in a controlled way. If you did not score your loaf at all, it would explode in the weakest point and create a very rustic looking loaf with cracks everywhere. I like to score my loaf down the center or off to the side at a 45-degree angle so it fully expands and gets the proper oven spring that it should and expands in that controlled way. You can also do decorative scoring and artistic scoring, which is unnecessary, and those are more shallow scores and just for looks. And when I do a decorative score, mine are pretty simple. I'll do like a tiny wheat stalk, and I essentially just do a couple lines down the side, like so. This doesn't do anything for me. It doesn't really help my loaf expand in any way, but it is pretty looking. The main score that we're looking for is the one that is off to the side and at a 45-degree angle or down the center. I allow about an inch on both sides. I don't score all the way down. The reason being is I want my loaf to expand upwards and not pancake out. If I were to go all the way to the bottom, you may see the loaf being flatter, and I don't want that. So I typically leave about 2 inches on this side and 1 inch on each side when I'm scoring. Like so. You can go back under the score with your bread lawn and your blade if you think you really didn't get a deep enough score. This type of score allows your loaf to have what they call an ear, which is where the belly will open here and you'll see a very distinct line that goes upward and essentially looks like an ear. For the second loaf, we are doing the double loaf pan method. Because I'm using a material that does stick and is non-toxic, I always put a piece of parchment paper inside to prevent the loaf from sticking to the bottom and creating a disaster. I always proof directly in my proofing basket or banneton. This allows the loaf to have moisture that wicks away from the surface and creates a better crust. And I put it directly in the loaf pan like so. Really nothing changes in this process. I score it exactly like my other loaf. It's just going to come out as a sandwich shape, which is way easier for sandwiches and way easier to cut. And after that is done, I usually spray my loaf to give it a little bit more moisture and steam. And I cover the top like so. So let's go to the oven. Like I said, I preheated my oven to 500 degrees Fahrenheit. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it down to 450. And we will get the hot Dutch oven out of the oven. And to allow my loaf to get more steam and to potentially expand a little bit better and create a softer, more golden and crispy crust and blistered crust, I put a few ice cubes in the bottom of the Dutch oven. You see that's already creating a lot of steam. And then I put my loaf in the Dutch oven, and this goes directly in the oven. The double loaf will also go in the oven. They're both in the oven. And we set the timer for about 22 minutes or so is what I like to do. It's now been 22 minutes at 450 degrees Fahrenheit. It's time to take the lid off the Dutch oven and the second loaf pan off of the other loaf pan. Oh my goodness. It's starting to look really good. At this point, I typically set the timer for another 20 minutes and then I check on it to see how dark I want the crust. And when I feel like it's done, then I take the temperature of the inside to just confirm and make sure it is fully cooked on the inside. It's actually been another 25 minutes with the lid off, and I think that my loaf is properly brown and how I like it. Came out really pretty. You can always leave it directly on the rack for a few minutes if you like it to be really golden. You can leave it in the oven for a little bit longer. This is what I meant by the ear. To double check that your loaf is fully cooked, you can take a thermometer and put it in the center of the loaf. And if it reads 200 plus degrees Fahrenheit, it's fully baked through in the middle. So this one is done. Sometimes the loaf pans take longer to bake for some reason. Okay, it is only 187, so this needs probably a good 5 more minutes to bake through. It's now hit over 200 degrees Fahrenheit, so it is fully cooked on the inside. I like to remove it from the loaf pan immediately so that the moisture isn't trapped in the bottom and that the steam continues to release from the crust. You'll want to let your loaf cool for 1 to 2 hours before you cut it open. This is part of the baking process. It will continue to release steam for the next couple of hours as it cools. And if you were to cut into it immediately, the steam would remain on the inside and it would feel a little bit gummy and wet. And so you want to let it cool before you do cut into it. I hope this video was helpful. If you like this kind of content, please like and subscribe, and comment below what kind of videos would be helpful and what tutorials you'd like to see.